The Brother's Son has just been released on Netflix, and I'd probably say that it's the platform's first attempt at a big show of the year. They're going in early after only 4 days. Focusing on the attempted takeout of Big Son during the first episode, it caused his son Charles to travel to Los Angeles with the intention of protecting his mother and brother who decided to escape the life of crime many years ago. However, whilst there, death followed him, and many secrets about the family were revealed, ultimately causing their relationship to change forever. So with that, let's recap, break down, and explain all that there was to take away from this show. Here is The Brother's Son ending explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The ending. As we embarked onto the ending of the season, we saw that all of the ghosts from every triad were going to be meeting at one specific place, which was organized by Eileen's son. She saw the threat from the Boxers, the initial group that tried to take out Big Son, as an opportunity to unite the triads and essentially be ruled under one supreme leader, which was referred to as the Dragonhead. This was something that she wanted to be, considering that she was essentially the person that held the most valuable information of them all. The names of every leader, something which the Boxers wanted. She was the Rolodex. After going back to Taipei and visiting her mother, she found out that her sister had died whilst she'd been in America, keeping herself and her son Bruce safe. This was something which came as a shock to her, and she didn't know. Because before she left, she told Big Son, her husband, that she wanted to be notified if anything happened to anybody that she cared about. And obviously, he disregarded that request. So whilst she believed he was in a coma following what happened in the first episode, she whispered in his ear that she was going to destroy the very thing that he cared about, his empire, and she planned on sitting on the throne herself. During this conversation, she put a pin underneath his fingernail because she was suspicious over whether or not he was still in a coma, and although he managed to keep the pain suppressed, he was actually pretending in order to see if his enemies were going to look to take advantage whilst he was weak. And that very person who looked to take advantage was his own wife. During the meeting that was planned, we saw that the Boxers infiltrated it due to Bruce revealing information to Grace on where the meeting would be happening and who would be there, and most of the triad leaders were either wiped out or arrested from this. This was something which caused conflict amongst the Sun family, as Charles was tasked to kill his brother by his father for betraying the family, but he himself couldn't do it. The whole show was based around an individual's identity in the family and if they were living to serve the family name, or if they were living to truly be themselves. We saw this with Charles with the fact that he had other passions such as baking and cooking, and he wanted to lead his own life, but he was almost morphed into being this killer from a young age. So it ultimately meant that he never really had a choice, and we saw the same with Bruce. He was considered to be the lame one in the family because he wasn't brought up around the violence and didn't truly know how to handle himself. But despite being introduced to that life with his family arriving, he wanted to do everything that he could to get his family out of it, because from an outsider's perspective, he only saw the trouble that it brought and the devastation that came with it too. So despite being considered the weak one, he was actually the person who saved the day right at the end. He knew that the only way that his family would be safe would be for his father to be out of the picture. So during the climax of the season, we saw Bruce fire the weapon at his father and deliberately miss his organs so that he'd just be bleeding out. But if his father wanted to survive, he'd need to phone for an ambulance, and then, once admitted to the emergency room, because it was a gunshot wound, the police would need to be notified. So he would essentially be arrested and then be out of the picture for good, something which we did see happen, which meant that the family could do as they pleased. With the leaders of the triads being wiped out or incarcerated, that meant that Eileen went back to Taipei with the intention of taking over all of the organizations and being the leader that she always wanted to be. This was a moment where I felt like it kind of went against everything that Bruce did for her. But it did tie into the fact that now she had the freedom that she'd always desired. She could now do what she wanted, and that was to be the Dragonhead that she dreamed of being. With Bruce, we saw him have the opposite of when the season began, just like when he was watching the guy in the sports car at the start. At the end, he was now that very person, and even though he wasn't happy with the life that his family was going on to lead, he'd reap the benefits from it. But it seemed like he was continuing with his studies and wanting to be a doctor whilst balancing improv and entertaining people that way. Then, with Charles, it felt like there was going to be a happy ending with him and Alexis, but that never came. Instead, we saw that he had his own bakery and had finally perfected the churro recipe. something which was representative of his time in the States. But instead of just waiting for somebody to arrive, and that somebody being Alexis, he went back to Taipei with the intention of protecting his mother to stop opposition from feeling as though they could just move in, showing that his family was something that he was always going to protect. And no matter how much he disliked the fact that he was this ruthless killer, it was all he truly knew. The hug that the brothers shared in the closing moments was something which really marked the journey that they went on as a pair, as it was something which they never would have done at the start, and it showed that different parts of each other had rubbed off on one another, and they changed each other for the better. After the credits rolled, there was a post-credits scene which was focused around Big Sun's second-in-command having a meeting and hearing about the fact that Frank Ma, a triad leader, was going to be testifying against Big Sun, most likely in order to get a deal in favor of himself. This is something that could be setting up a season 2. With Eileen going back to Taiwan with the intention of being the Dragonhead, Big Sun's second-in-command could look to make something happen to Frank Ma in prison, which will prevent him from speaking in the courts, which could help Big Sun in the position that he's in. He most likely wants to get no charges against Big Sun so that he can take him back to Taipei with the intention of being rival to his former wife and divide the triads all over again, causing just as much conflict as there was before. So it's going to be interesting to see if that does happen, and a season 2 will get commissioned. Who were the Boxers? The Boxers themselves were an organization that kind of stood for good, but in order to get the goodness that they wanted, they had to cause death to those that caused trouble. They wanted to fight against the triads and take them down because they felt that they were oppressing the people and causing more suffering than good. Hence why they wanted to eliminate all of the leaders, render the organizations to the point of nothingness, and then rule themselves. But in a way that was more for the people and first and second-hand victims of the triads' rule. Grace was the leader of the Boxers, which was one of the twists of the season, as she was essentially using Bruce to get information on the triads' leaders, as she wanted to set up charities, facilities, and organizations where people would be able to get help if they'd suffered at the hands of the triads. But we saw her be killed by June in an act of revenge for them being responsible for killing her sister May, and all of the members were also killed in the showdown at the end where the Ghosts, Boxers, and FBI were all present. So the Boxers were basically shut down and eliminated during the finale. This to me was something which showed that Grace wanted a life with no triads in, and to avenge the people who they'd harmed. But two wrongs don't make a right, and more violence only brings more trouble, and she came face to face with her own repercussions of violence right at the end, so it was never going to end well. Overall review. I thought this show was pretty good. It had a layered story to it with true character development, which was enough to keep me hooked throughout the 8-episode run that it had. All of the performances were top tier, and Michelle Yeoh, Sam Li, and Justin Shin stole it completely. They were so convincing, and you really got the dysfunctional family dynamic from them, where there were secrets and lies tucked around every corner. Whilst the story was good and the performances were also great too, the real standout for me in this show was the fight scenes. Not only were they choreographed so well, but I thought that they were shot so nicely too. We were able to get so close up into them and feel like we were essentially a part of them. The sound effects were something which also added to what I could only describe as a 4D viewing experience when watching them. When it comes to a part of the story that I thought wasn't really needed, I don't really feel like we needed the arm that was focused around the FBI, Alexis, and Charles's tense relationship with her. I understand it would be weird if the police weren't involved with something like this, but it just felt like it didn't really go anywhere considering the generous amount of screen time that it got. Plus, I could tell the moment that Alexis was introduced to us that she was going to be some kind of love interest, so it's a shame that there wasn't really a surprise with that. But that was probably my only main piece of criticism towards a pointless part of the show. One thing that I did love was the small parts of comedy that they'd often incorporate into the story, such as Blood Boots and Bruce's comedic partnership, and also TK and some of the funny moments which would occur with him too. It provided the lightness which was sometimes needed. Overall, I would say that this show is definitely worth a watch. If you love action, fight scenes, a good story, and some solid performances, then this won't let you down. So, there you have it, The Brother-Son ending explained.